Hey, Originals listeners. If you're as ancient as I am, you'll remember all the cigarette ads that used to fatten up magazines. Certainly, the most memorable ad of the 70s was the one for the ladies' cigarette, Virginia Slims, and its slogan, "You've come a long way, baby." The cigarette, I learned, was introduced by Philip Morris in 1968 and sought to capitalize on the growing sense of female empowerment overtaking the culture. They actually came up with a terrible name for this. It was called femvertising. These ads would juxtapose black and white photos depicting women throughout history being prevented from smoking, alongside a portrait of a hot, liberated woman like Cheryl Tiegs flaunting a lit butt in a snazzy pantsuit. This campaign, quite unsurprisingly, was created by a man, one Pat Martin of Chicago's Leo Burnett agency. And there was quite a bit of internal debate if the slogan should be, "You've come a long way, m'lady." I'm bringing this campaign up for a couple of reasons. First, to remark on how ridiculous it is to suggest the pinnacle of female progress in this country was that women might openly smoke. Right? Hundreds of years of battles, and at last they're rewarded with equal access to emphysema. But also to highlight that, yes, by the 70s, women had made many, many advances, but corporations remained incredibly backwards by current standards. 2 of the 5 major movie studios are currently either run or co-run by women. But these years, the 1970s, the Ron Burgundy years, were when today's guest, Sherry Lansing, was climbing the ladder to become the first female head of production at a movie studio, as she did in 1980 at 20th Century Fox, and then the first woman to lead a studio, as she did in 1992 when she became chairman of Paramount Pictures, a job she held until 2005. Sherry Lansing can be seen as kind of a transitional figure because she had to succeed while making nice within an inherently chauvinistic system. She was, and remains, movie star beautiful. And when she got the Fox job, the New York Times headline read, "Sherry Lansing, former model, named head of Fox Productions." Her entree into the business occurred first as an actress, when she was taken under the wing of legendary director Howard Hawks, and then, as the media like to point out, her early studio career was helped along by her association with another older man, studio executive and movie producer Dan Melnick. Lansing first met Michael Douglas just before shooting began on 1979's The China Syndrome. When she introduced herself, Douglas replied, "Honey, casting doesn't start until next week." She explained she was in fact the Columbia Pictures executive in charge of the picture. "Quite honestly, my jaw dropped," Douglas told Lansing's biographer Stephen Galloway. "There was this absolutely stunning woman in her high heels, definitely over 6 feet tall. I had all these sexist thoughts and was really ready to dismiss her simply based on how beautiful she looked." In other words, as you'll hear, it was complicated. This is The Originals, and I'm your host, Andrew Goldman. I spent decades interviewing celebrities for magazines, the vast majority of whom were just there to sell something and shared very little of themselves. So I created The Originals to interview cultural figures who actually had something to say, wanted to express something real. I suspected, and correctly it turned out, that Sherry Lansing was one of these people. And it's why I reached out to both she and her husband, The Exorcist director William Friedkin, to be on the show. Fingers crossed Billy turns up later in the season. Welcome to the 3rd episode of our 4th season, produced in proud partnership with Los Angeles Magazine. Sherry Lansing, welcome to The Originals.
Thank you. It's so great to be here.
See any good movies lately?
Actually, I have. I just saw Tar, which I thought was extraordinary. It's a very complicated movie. I think Cate Blanchett's performance is simply amazing. I mean, she inhabits the character and makes you believe every single thing. And
actually, I half expected, considering how many films you had to see, how many scripts you had to read, that you would have said, you know what, I haven't seen a movie in 3 years. I mean, there was never sort of like...
No, exactly the opposite. So when I left the movie business, which is now almost 18 years ago, so it's another lifetime, I didn't leave my love of movies. I just left my desire to make movies or to run a studio, and I wanted to go into the philanthropic area, in particular cancer research. But I didn't leave my love of movies. If anything, I think I liked them more because when I was running a studio, I'd watch a movie and I'd go, oh God, that's opening opposite our movie. Oh my God, it's so much better, or it's so much worse, but it's got a better marketing campaign. And my pure love of cinema, was being diminished. So I think I'm a bigger fan of movies now than when I ran a studio or produced them, and pretty much as big a fan as I was when I was 16 years old and 12 years old and 20 years old. And I actually just appreciate them. I'm far less critical.
When I read the biography, the Stephen Galloway biography of you, Leading Lady, it seemed like as you were going into your career, the tent poles and the highly marketed movies, there seemed to be a certain amount of exhaustion with them. So I noticed you didn't mention that the last movie you saw was a Thor movie or something. Are you avoidant?
No, I've seen the first one of almost all of them. I haven't necessarily seen the sequels of all of them. The tentpole movies are absolutely spectacular. The visuals, I think some of the performances are quite good, and they're for a mass audience. I'm 78 years old. They're not necessarily making them for me. Yes, I am, and I'm so proud of it. So if I had a grandchild, which I don't, and I hope someday I do, I would love to go to those movies with a grandchild.
They are fun with my kids. Speaking of my kids, I had a conversation the other day about my children, and one of the concerns that I have, they're adolescent age, and one of the concerns that I have is that their life has been fairly trouble-free. We haven't divorced. Neither of their parents have died. We have a very decent house. We have plenty of food to eat. And I said so many of the accomplished people that I know have this crazy adversity in their life, and for whatever reason, it's propelled them. It's given them this sort of ambition that I feel like maybe my kids are going to be without. And I feel like when I'm reading your story now, would you consider one of those people? There was quite a bit of adversity in your childhood. No?
Yes, it's very interesting that you're saying this. I've often said it to people that though I loved my mother more than life itself, if she had been less critical and perhaps able to express her love more, and if my father hadn't died when I was 9, I would have had quite a different life, because I think everything that motivated me was to get my mother's approval. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I ever really got it, but I think that motivated me. And if I had felt that thing that I envy so much when I see it, I probably would have stayed in Chicago, married a lovely local person, and, nothing wrong with this, by the way, but not had this need to get out there and prove that I was worthy,
Yeah. So your
which I never did. You never get that approval. And that's what's so very, very difficult for people to understand. You think, well, if I become famous as an actor or as a director, if I make a lot of money, if I, discover a cure for cancer, whatever, yes, you're going to get all that approval, but it's not going to fill you up, because your parents are your parents. And so I think you have to fill yourself up. And I went through analysis, and I remember the analyst saying to me, one of the most brilliant lines, analysis is relearning the habits of a lifetime. In other words, we're going to parent you, but this time we're going to parent you different. My mother was, a survivor from Nazi Germany, so an inability to express love was not her fault. It just was who she was. She escaped Germany and came over here when she was, I think, 16 or 17, and, fully integrated into the United States, and was a strong woman who survived and didn't want pity. And I learned resilience from my mother. She took over my father's business when he died. I mean, she was my first role model. But
her name was Margot. I saw pictures of you in the 1980s with her. I mean, she lived to see you quite successful. I talked to Norman Lear about this for a story, and he has famous stories about, basically getting being the first inductee into the Television Hall of Fame, and his mother saying something incredibly dismissive. I mean, I wouldn't do justice to it, but was she comically dismissive of your accomplishments?
Well, a couple of times she said some lines that I guess could probably rival Norman Lear's stories. She basically never acknowledged it. And when I became the first woman to head a studio, she said, "Oh my God, now no one will marry you." I remember that line. And I said, "Mom, really?" She said, "Yes." And then She often sent me bad reviews of movies that I had done, which I thought was
No!
just thought you'd like to see this. But here's the thing. Here's the thing I really want to say. When my mother died, I found a scrapbook. I'll start to cry remembering this, in which she had saved every clipping that was on me. And then her friends told me that all she did was talk about how proud she was of me.
Right.
So I think in the way my mother was raised, she believed that if you praised somebody, they would get a big head, they would be spoiled, they would be a brat, and also that there was this thing that God would curse you. It's kind of a thing in, I don't know if it's in the Jewish religion or German, just when you think things are going good, rain's going to fall.
It's tempting the fates, right?
Tempting the fates. And in many ways, I guess I'm grateful because by not doing anything, it made me value human relationships or, someone doing something kind and not thinking that your value comes from your outside success because she never talked about that.
I hate to admit this, but today was the first day I ever watched Rio Lobo. I've never seen I've never seen the film before, and you have an amazing entrance. I don't know if there are some people younger than me. Well, I bet a lot of people actually don't know that you started out as a model and actress. I think that a lot of people have
I started out as a model, and using the word actress is really not being fair to the career because I was so bad. Oh, God.
I'm not about to critique Sherry's performance in this, but Rio Lobo is far from Howard Hawks' best work. I will say Sherry's entrance is pretty unforgettable since she's wearing nothing up top, save her arms, which are crossed over her chest. Here she is acting surprisingly friendly to a Union soldier in a serape who's broken into her house in the middle of the night to hide from outlaws.
I'm sorry, miss. There's so much chasing me and I don't have any other place to go.
You don't have to go.
What?
You can stay here.
Would you mind putting that light out?
As you wish.
Thanks. Don't stand in the middle of the room. Get away from there.
Can you see anyone?
I don't see a soul.
Would you like me to have a look?
I'm looking.
Yes, but I could go outside.
You better put some clothes on first.
As you wish.
So what's so horrifying about listening to this is you can see that voice is the voice that Howard Hawks wanted me to have. And it's not my voice. And so one of the reasons I was so uncomfortable, and I never had a comfortable day being an actress, never had a day when I went, wow, my body and my mind, I just feel relaxed and at ease, was because I wasn't myself. Like I am really comfortable talking to you, Chicago accent or whatever accent I have. That's who I am. And accepting my authentic self is a gift, for me. And as an actress, I was told I had a Chicago accent by Howard Hawks. Let me see if I can still do it. That I had to talk like this and be very low and throaty. And
was this a brunette thing? I don't understand, because there are certainly beautiful bombshell actresses with higher voice. What is it about deep voices with him? It's not all of his actresses speak with deep voices.
I think probably most of them who are the leading ladies do. He had a very distinct type. He liked tall brunettes, and he made all of us go out and scream in the forest so that we would get nodules on our vocal cords so that we would have a deep voice. And you had to talk like that all the time. So the entire time I was on the set, you could never really be yourself.
I think if a director were now sending out actresses to literally get nodules on their vocal cords, there would be an expose in the New York Times, don't you think?
Well, he'd be canceled. He'd be canceled, and he'd probably be canceled because, he didn't like anyone talking to his leading actresses. But, Howard Hawks was a brilliant director. And nobody was nicer to work with than John Wayne. But the mores of that time are different than the mores of this time. We have progressed.
Absolutely. John Wayne, I have to say, looking a little long in the tooth. This was not his last role, but it was Howard Hawks' last film. Did it feel like kind of the end of an era? It was a Western.
No, not at all. And by the way, I was too young to know the end of an era or anything. I just knew that Hawks was I knew who John Wayne was, and he was a superstar. And I knew that Hawks was one of the most respected directors, and I knew that the studios listened to him rather than him listening to the studios, because he wanted Chris Mitchum for the role, who was great, by the way, and the studio wanted someone else. And I can still remember this, and it's like seeing what it used to be like. And he said, well, I guess I don't feel too good today. I guess we won't shoot. And he didn't shoot. And he didn't shoot the next day. And then Chris Mitchum showed up. I mean, so that was his power. I mean, he was going to get what he wanted. And he was right. I mean, that's who he saw in the role.
And Hawks was very fond of you, right? I mean, you spent a lot of time with Hawks.
I spent an enormous amount of time with him because he was training me. I'm a big disappointment. If he was alive today, he would say, oh, God, I can't believe she ended up running a studio instead of being an actress. He was very much chosen, I guess, I don't know that I was the only one, but chosen me to become like Lauren Bacall. And unfortunately, I don't have the talent. And I also didn't have the emotional makeup to be an actress. The rejections of really hurt me. And so Hawk spent a lot of time telling me how I should dress, rehearsing the scenes with me, working on my voice. And he was great. I mean, he never made a pass at me, never did anything inappropriate, but he took a real interest. I think he probably, I can't speak to that, but I think he probably did that with all of his leading ladies.
Yeah. Having a legendary director, pick you and say, I want you to be the next, I don't know, Lauren Bacall, it just seems like that kind of support from somebody of stature would just sort of be the kind of thing that would propel you to...
So you have to realize I was in my 20s. I had very little self-esteem. I had not gone into therapy. I needed to go into therapy. My father died. I did not go to his funeral. They thought that would be so traumatic. But I didn't believe he was really dead. So I was forever looking for him, that he had left because I was a bad girl. Ugh. But at 9, I didn't understand it. And then my mother was always there, but not able emotionally, for whatever the reason, to express her pride or love. And now I'm coming on this set and I'm being told that what I am, my voice, the way I walk, whatever, isn't right. And so it was an accumulation. I think that I wanted to be an actress because I thought if I became famous, all my problems would disappear. And my mother would love me, and my father, who I knew was by then dead, but emotionally would be proud. Yeah. And it doesn't work that way. And I thank whoever you thank that I got these parts early rather than at 40 realizing this, that I realized it in my mid to late 20s that this wasn't for me. So the interesting thing is I left and I have a teaching credential. So I started teaching in Watson, East LA, math and English. And then I got eventually a job for $5 an hour reading scripts. And I walked into an office that is the size of this table and, sat there and got a script and felt I was home. I felt this is where I belong. And I never had that anxiety that I had when I was acting.
That's so interesting. I want to talk to you about reading because I think that we're going to talk about being a woman in a male-dominated industry. But I did a profile years ago of an executive who worked for Peter Chernin. Her name is Catherine Pope. I don't know if you ever encountered her, but very smart woman.
Yeah, very.
And I asked her, the secret to her success, and I think that one of the things that she said was that she would frequently go into meetings having read exactly what everybody else was supposed to have read and gradually find out that she was actually one of the few people who had done the reading and everybody else was just faking it. Did you find, is this something that commonly happens in Hollywood?
I can't say that no one else had read it, but I can say that what she's expressing is that we as women, the early women, because there were women before us, but the early women who were trying to go from being a reader to another job, because for a long time that was the job you got, was being a reader. We worked harder. We over-prepared. Mm-hmm. I mean, we didn't read the script once, we read it twice. To get that seat at the table, we over-prepared, overworked, over-read, because we wanted to keep our jobs. I know that any woman I worked with over-prepared. Right. And that was, and I suspect that's still true today. But eventually it'll even out. We'll have, women that don't prepare. We'll have women that do. As we get to true equality, that will be normal. The thing that I most remember is how nobody heard your voice. And I remember it very clearly when I was in a meeting, and it was a big circle of executives discussing a script, and I was the junior executive. But they kind of went around the room, and I said my comment. And the producer who was conducting this meeting on his material kind of didn't, yeah, okay, next. And then the sixth person, who was a man, said exactly what I had said. And he said to him, now that's a good idea.
Unreal.
And I thought, wow, this person doesn't hear my voice. Now, you have two choices, especially back then. Well, you can go up to the producer and say, excuse me, I said that and you didn't hear my voice, in which case he'll probably kick you off the project. Right. Who are you? Not anymore. I'm talking about, 110 years ago. Or you suck it up. You say, what difference does it make? They're doing what I wanted. It shows my instincts are good. And you learn, I use this phrase, how to pick your battles. And that was not a battle worth, falling on the hill for. There are battles that are, but that one wasn't.
I read this quote from Marcia Nassiter, who came a little before you, I think that 20 years or so, and she was the first vice president at United Artists. And she said that if you're a woman working in the film business, every male executive looked at you as though you were prey. And you, of course, you're beautiful, you're like very tall, former model, actress, and you'd walk into a room and I imagine people would look at you and not necessarily take you seriously. I wondered, was there anything that you did in order to get them to take you seriously?
I think it's, you asked me why I stopped acting, and I said it was gradual. It's not the first day, not the second day. It's the gradual wear and tear. Yeah. And this is the positive wear and tear. You go into enough meetings and you're prepared and you have a skill set. Eventually, people know it.
Right.
You just have to get into the meeting enough times. So, yeah, sure, the first time you walk into a meeting, and thank you for those kind words, the first time you walk into a meeting, people's natural reaction is, who is she sleeping with? Who isn't she sleeping? And then they realize you're not sleeping with anyone, and then they ignore you. And then after you're in the 10th meeting, they hear you and they go, oh, God, she's good at what she does. I'd like to work with her. And so you just, look, I can't complain. I was running Fox when I was 35 years old. So how can I possibly complain? But men got raises. I didn't. I went to the head of the studio and said, we're doing the same job. How come I'd like a raise too? And he said, but you don't have children. Yeah. You're not married. He does. And I went, okay. So my self-esteem needed to change. I needed to be able to say, well, that's not right. Instead of, okay, I'm just so grateful to have a job.
Well, you became an executive. I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but I have a small bone to pick with you. You were the executive on The China Syndrome, a movie I avoided seeing for decades because I was like, this doesn't sound like a movie I want to see. It's about China. It's about some illness in China. China Syndrome. Sherry, not a good title.
Actually, it turned out to be a good title because the film did very well. 3 Mile Island happened, and it was kind of referenced all the time. And
it happened not long after the release of this film, right?
I think the second or third week. So people were seeing what we had put in the movie. It's a
be honest, as a film executive, even though something terrible has happened, is part of your heart jumping to think that there is a disaster that's going to get people to the movie?
It actually hurt the box office. So,
it did.
So that's it. Because it was such a horrible event, people didn't want to go to the movies to see what they were watching on television. So it frightened people off rather than increased our box office.
I still don't know what a China Syndrome is. What is the China Syndrome? I mean, I think that there's probably been headlines in the last year that have in the last couple of years that have called COVID a China Syndrome. But what is it referring to?
Well, it's about the nuclear fallout. But I'll tell you what happened. And so the studio marketing people felt it was a bad title, and they wanted to change the title. And Jane Fonda and Michael Douglas were the leads in the movie, and I was the executive in charge of the movie. And I got a call from Jane And I did not know her except for meeting her on the set. You have to understand, I'm a vice president. I'm a junior executive. Jane Fonda's beyond a superstar and someone I also admire, for her activism and everything. And she says, and I quote, and we've had this conversation because I laugh about it. She said, I hear that I don't know if she used the word asshole, I don't know, but some jerk at the studio wants to change the title. What is wrong with this fascist person? Are they crazy? And I went, who is it? And I said, well, actually, I guess I'm also part of it. Are you crazy? I said, I hear you. So I went back. I said, we're not changing the title. I think for me, watching her then exert her strength and her opinion was inspirational, actually.
Yeah. I find what you did for a living to be, just imagining kind of the pressure you're under. And you actually described the pressure of, somebody very, very, you were still quite young. And Larry Gelbart, who had, a long history as a comedy writer, going back to, Sid Caesar? Was he in that writer's room, the famous writer's room? And then, of course, he did MASH.
Yes.
But he comes with a script with John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd attached called Neighbors. And they're like the hottest thing coming off of SNL. And you passed, right? How can you pass on something like this?
So, I actually have to say that I might have been very insecure in many ways, but for whatever the reason, I didn't lack self-esteem in my intelligence. I don't know why. I trusted my instincts. And so to me, the most important thing was the screenplay, not who was in it. The director, fantastic. The writer, fantastic. It did not have Belushi and Aykroyd attached when I passed.
Oh, it didn't?
It just was a script. Only I didn't think the script was funny. I just didn't. I don't know how to say it any other way. And so I passed. And then I remember I got a call from Michael Eisner, who was running Paramount at the time, and he had passed. And he said to me, have you heard the news? I said, what news? He said, that script Neighbors that you passed on? I said, yeah, what? He said, well, Belushi and Aykroyd just committed to it. It was like the hottest stars in the world. I said, what? And he was like telling me this because like commiserating with me like we would be the butt of jokes. And so I spent the next year thinking that this was going to be Star Wars and that I would be fired, that I had made the biggest mistake of my life. But I still didn't think it was funny. And I didn't understand it. That's all I can say. I should see the movie now and see. Maybe I'd really like it. I
don't think. Well, they cast. I don't understand, but they cast Belushi as the straight man and Aykroyd as the wacky one. It's sort of.
I can barely remember it, but all I know is that it opened when I was in New York, and I went to the 10 a.m. screening of the movie to see it. And I don't want to criticize anybody's movies. I think John Avildsen did it, and I'm pretty sure he was the director, and I loved his work. But I didn't get the movie. I was so relieved. I can't tell you, because I thought, maybe it'll be a hit, but it's not going to be Star Wars. So I'm not going to lose my job over this one.
Are there people who have seen their careers implode at studios because they've passed on things that have become Star Wars?
I don't know if they've seen them implode, but it's forever tagged to them. This is the person who passed on American Graffiti. This is the person who passed on Star Wars. And when I was at Paramount, we would never let anyone take a project away from us if we didn't want to make it, unless we had the right to partner it, thereby protecting ourselves from, guess what? That script that you didn't like so much, Steve McQueen is doing it. So you might change your opinion then, or you might change your opinion if the director has a different take.
Did you ever have an experience like that where you were watching something early and you were like, if this doesn't work, I'm in the wrong business, and the thing comes out and it actually doesn't work with the public?
I've had a lot of pictures that I loved, like Searching for Bobby Fischer, More Than Life Itself, and no one saw them. Wonder Boys. I think we released it 3 times. Pictures that I personally adored and loved and no one saw. So I've had as many disappointments with movies as I've had successes, and I've been wrong as much as I've been right.
When you became the head of Paramount, did you sweat weekends when your movies were coming out? How would you spend the weekend? And would you be glued to whatever terminal? And what was it like when something would like sort of go off the charts great versus something that would...
Yes, I sweated every weekend. So there was a ritual. So, and again, the business changed because when I started in the business, you'd release it in 2 theaters. And then the next week you'd go to maybe 10 and then word of mouth would kick in. So you didn't know right away, you know. But once you started to release it in 1,000 theaters, 2,000, 3,000 theaters, you knew Friday night whether your movie was going to be a hit or a failure. And you could almost tell what the multiple would be by the exits. So you could be off, but, rarely. So Friday afternoon at around 3:00, you'd have read all the reviews and you were either thrilled or you were depressed. But bad reviews do not always make bad box office. Sometimes I used to think there was an inverse proportion because we'd get really bad reviews and we'd get great box office, and then we'd have Wonder Boys or Bobby Fischer that got extraordinary reviews and nobody saw them. But at any rate, you could live in hope. And by 10:00, you knew the Friday night estimate. And you knew whether you had a hit or whether you had a failure. And many a Friday night, I was joyous, celebrating, yay, yay. And many a Friday night, I didn't want to get out of bed Saturday morning. I was so depressed. And I was depressed because, I had been a producer. I just felt not only did I fail by choosing the wrong movie, but I failed because we didn't market it right. See, I always felt that it was the marketing department should be able to get you an opening weekend, no matter what. And then the second weekend was the film. It would go up or down based on whether people liked it. So every Saturday I would make that call to the filmmakers, anyone associated with the film, the actors, and either be jubilant or apologizing.
But both of those films you mentioned, I think, would be tough to market. Wonder Boys, I mean, it's a great character-driven drama. It's about a professor, Michael Douglas, right? How could you market that differently?
Well, obviously, we didn't do a very good job on either of them because, yes, they're tough to market. But, my dad, who was a wonderful businessman, but called himself a salesman, always used to say to me when I would watch him, "Watch me. This is an easy one because the store wants it. But the next guy, he doesn't want it. He doesn't want my couches. And now you're going to see what a salesman's supposed to do." And so that was kind of the motto that I grew up with. I love Mission Impossible, but Mission Impossible with Tom Cruise, yes, you have to have a great campaign. Yes, you're shooting for the stratosphere with the number, but it's the Wonder Boys. That's when you really show your skill set, and we didn't do a good job. We tried.
I think Stephen Galloway's line, I wanted to ask you about it because it was so interesting to me. He wrote in his biography of you, "It was one of the central mysteries of Lansing's personality that she could tolerate men whom others found intolerable." One of your early mentors was Dan Melnick, a producer, an older producer who you dated, and then he became a mentor. Is that a correct way to sort of describe it?
Briefly, but not when we worked together.
Yeah.
So,
but he was, and you were also very close with James Aubrey, and both of these men, when I read their obituaries, and people use words like they were not widely liked, considered bombastic, all these things that don't suggest like they're really all that much fun to hang out with.
Well, so first of all, I don't think they're right on either of them. So let me say that. But so this is what's interesting to me. My first father died when I was 9, and he had an artist temperament. He was in the real estate business, but he loved opera. He loved movies. He loved silent movies. And I think I inherited my love of movies from him. My second father, my mother remarried when I was 12, and he was a businessman. And he was a very successful and very strong, and some would say tough. So I watched that kind of personality that you could say is more abrupt, not as warm, can get angry, have a temper. And I watched my mother handle it And she'd start to laugh when my father got mad. Oh, look at him. He's getting all upset about such a silly thing. And I watched that. And so I think for me, these men that are called difficult, and there's a long list of them that I worked with who I adored. And these men that are called difficult, it was their style. They raised their voice. That's a style. They were all highly intelligent. They were all people extremely good at what they did. And here's the interesting thing about all of them. Underneath all those layers, they were what I used to refer to as mush face. They were kind. They were decent. And they didn't stab you in the back. And that's a great quality. And so I respected their loyalty. I respected their integrity. You mentioned Dan Melnick. He made some of the greatest films ever. I mean, let's talk about all that jazz. I mean, some of the greatest films. He loved artists, Sumner Redstone was one of the greatest bosses I ever had in my entire life. He was loyal. He was decent. He was the first to call, when something was going well, and the first to back you when it wasn't. And he loved film. Right. I mean, he saw everything. Yeah. So people are complicated, and you only get one side of them. There's not a kinder man in the whole world than John Dolgen, and not a brighter man.
I mean, I assume that you don't escape the bombastic side. I mean, what do you do when somebody yells at you?
Just realize it's a style, and that's just their way of talking. And I never took it personal, but I was used to my father. So it was just like, hey, they're yelling. And I think of my mother going, yeah. I learned a couple of things from my mother, I guess, but I learned them early. When these men were saying, no, we'll never make this movie. No, that's it, blah, 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 blah. And they were yelling, that you never confront them when they're yelling because it's too emotional. So you just say, okay, I understand. Okay. And you leave as quickly as you can. Come back the next day, you usually get the yes you needed. So it's just learning that it's a personality trait.
And do you include Scott Rudin in that category? I mean, he is considered a brilliant producer.
A genius. I think Scott is one of the most gifted producers I ever worked with, and except for once or twice, all of my arguments with Scott were to better the movie, which is one of the things I respected. There were one or two exceptions, but when I didn't talk to him for a month, I remember, because it was an exception when it wasn't about the movie. But usually the arguments with Scott were about nothing more than I want an extra day, or I need this, or I need that. They were never about give me a better limo or give me a bigger suite. I mean, none of that. It was only to make the movie better. Yeah. That doesn't excuse. I'm not excusing the behavior that I've read about.
He's one of the very rare individuals, I think, who's lost a lot of business for doing things that are not sexual in nature, but that people find abusive.
Well, if it's true, you don't throw someone out of a moving car, and you don't put I don't know what's true because none of this happened under our regime. This was all later, so I don't know. But I think here's the good news. Okay, the Me Too movement doesn't mean that sexual harassment or abuse will never happen again, but people will not get away with it anymore. There's a big difference. I mean, if I was sexually harassed when I was 22 and had gone to the HR department, first of all, I don't even know if there was an HR department, I probably would have been fired. I mean, they would have said that's not true, blah, 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 blah. Today, everything's changed. I mean, men and women relate to each other completely differently.
But this is a business that's not like other businesses. I mean, I look at your own biography. You were a producer on Kramer versus Kramer, which it was one of Meryl Streep's first movies. And before the first shot, Dustin Hoffman slaps Meryl Streep in the face. It becomes like a big famous story. Your husband, Billy is famous for the story with the priest. In order to get a great performance out of the priest who is doing last rites in The Exorcist, he slaps them. He says, "Do you trust me?" And he slaps them right before the take. Is it fair to treat Hollywood like you would an insurance business? It obviously wouldn't be.
I actually agree with you. So let me talk about Billy. So that's easy because at least I know him and I know he did that. Whereas the others, I wasn't there. I don't know what happened with Dustin and Meryl. I know what I read, so I don't know. But Billy will freely admit that he slapped the priest, and the priest thanked him. So in other words, if if when I was an actress, so I can relate to this, Howard Hawks had come up and slapped me to make me cry or to get a startled reaction out of me, I would have thanked him, because that was in the pursuit of getting art.
Right.
If he had grabbed my boobs for no reason,
Yeah.
I would not have thanked him. I would have been outraged,
Right.
So there's a difference. Look, this isn't the insurance business. And in order to make a good movie, you have to really, the director has to be really in tune with his actors, in tune with the cinematographer, in tune with things. And you have to do things to help somebody often get a performance. Some people you don't need to. I doubt you ever have to do that with Meryl Streep. She can, probably, if she was the priest, he wouldn't have needed to do that,
Right.
So, but no one's suing over that. I've never heard anyone say he slapped me and then I gave the greatest performance of my life and I won the Academy Award and now I'm suing him. I've never heard anyone say that. Someone grabs them in an inappropriate way or for no reason, someone calls somebody abusive names or, does physical things. Bullying is not acceptable.
In 1980, you became the head of production at Fox, the production chief, and it was a very, very big deal. So big that they put you on the cover of the New York Times Magazine. I feel like it was sort of one of these Mary Tyler Moore sort of hat in the air moments. Everybody was celebrating it. Was it all that it was cracked up to be? I mean, I feel like Hollywood loves to be sort of self-congratulatory about social issues. Do you feel like you had everything that you wanted when you got that job and you were celebrated everywhere for it?
No, I didn't expect the celebration. That was nice and certainly made me feel good. To be honest, I think I was in over my head in that first job. I think I did a good enough job. I mean, I did it for 3 years. The very first interview I had, someone said to me, I know this is your first day on the job. Do you ever think about what you want to do next? I know that's a silly question. And I said, no, actually, I know exactly what I want to do next. I want to produce movies. And by the time I got to Paramount 12 years later, I felt I was in my comfort zone because I had produced. So I understood what it took to make a movie.
Lansing left Fox in 1982 to produce. It took her 5 years to make the movie that made her career. She'd seen a 1979 short film called Diversion, created by a Brit named James Dearden, about a guy who lives to regret having a tryst while his wife's away. No bunnies were boiled in making the short. For Lansing, Dearden expanded the script and it became Fatal Attraction, released in 1987. 4 years later, feminist author Susan Faludi included an entire chapter on the film in her landmark book, Backlash, singling out the film as an example of Hollywood's effort to silence independent women, and specifically taking Lansing to task for producing it. The message of the film was, in Faludi's words, the best single woman is a dead one. But the numbers were hard to argue with. Fatal Attraction, with a $40 million budget, grossed $320 million worldwide, which are the kind of numbers that certainly helped her land the Paramount gig in 1991, which, during her tenure, released, among many, many others, Forrest Gump, Saving Private Ryan, Braveheart, War of the Worlds, Wayne's World, and Mission Impossible. Sherry famously had the nicest no in Hollywood, but this didn't mean that she couldn't be fearsome when necessary. And I think Suge Knight, if he's listening from prison, will be mighty impressed by the anecdotes you're about to hear. Yeah, you left Fox after about 3 years. You did become a producer. You partnered with Stanley Jaffe, correct? Who was a more established producer at that point. He'd produced...
To say the least, he'd won the Academy Award for Kramer versus Kramer. That's rather established, yeah.
Yes. And you become a producer and you do a few movies that don't do anything. And then there's Fatal Attraction, right?
Right.
I mean, Fatal Attraction is basically career making for a lot of people, right? This was a very, very big deal. So it comes out in 1987. It represents this huge cultural moment. Obviously, ton of people saw it. People loved it, but also there were many feminists who hated it. Like Susan Faludi wrote that it was just this horrible male castration fantasy. Tell me, what was it about the material that particularly appealed to you?
Okay. The reason I think I found it so interesting was I identified with the Glenn Close character. And the reason not for the reasons that you think. I had a relationship with somebody that I cared very much about. And one morning, out of the blue, I mean, he told me he loved me the night before. He got up in the morning and said, I don't love you. I don't want to be here anymore. And he left. And I never heard from him again until we got back together, but it was like 2 years later. And I was devastated. I couldn't get out of bed. I didn't want to go to work. And I kept thinking, I have a college degree. What is wrong with me? And it was like he had taken me with him, taken all my insecurity, all my self-esteem. Being left triggered everything. And then I did stupid things that you can't do today, like dial his number and hear his voice and then hang up the phone. You can't do that because it says...
Why can't you do that? Of course you can.
No, because it says the phone number.
Oh, you can block that.
Well, I didn't know that.
Not that I've ever done such a thing, but anyway.
Drive around to his house in a car.
Yeah.
Everyone has done that. So you may think Glenn Close's character flipped from one married guy to many or whatever, but everyone has a piece of her in them that when they are dumped, they, I don't know. There were so many articles, I cut off all his pants after he left me and threw his clothes out. I mean, sane people doing things like this. So everybody feels something. And equally as important, everybody identifies with one side of the triangle. You identify with Michael Douglas. One night can ruin your whole life. You identify with Ann Archer. Your husband, has betrayed you. And for me, I wanted to make the movie because of the Glenn Close character, but also because I would hate listening to men saying, I had a wild night with this woman, but I never called her again. And I think, you never called her again? Couldn't you just call her and say, hey, it was a nice night, but that's about as far as I wanted to go? And when she says, I won't be ignored, Dan, I think everyone identifies with that. And when the movie was the success it was, I can't tell you how happy it was. That's probably the happiest I've ever been in terms of the film business. I used to go with Adrian and Samantha, his wife, and we'd sit and have dinner at the Hamburger Hamlet and watch the lines forming around the block.
That's Adrian Lyne. So did you witness any of this? That I was reading it, and it's just maybe it was a different time, but Susan Faludi wrote about being in a theater and listening to men shouting at the screen, punch the bitch's face in, punch the bitch's lights out. I'm not kidding. Do it, Michael. Kill her already. Kill the bitch.
Well, that's terrible. And that is not what we wanted. And I have to say, Adrian and I and Glenn, we really empathized with the character. Yeah. And we really felt, Stanley used to say to me, when do you think she went crazy? Sherry, do you think she went crazy when, she keyed his car? I said, no. She was pissed. And then I said, maybe taking the child, burning the bunny, but.
Well, I want to play this. Oprah actually had Michael Douglas and Glenn Close on. This is Glenn Close talking about the end. And I want to ask you as a producer, what happens when something like this happens?
What happened with me is when I heard that they wanted to make me into basically a psychopath, where I'd go after someone with a knife rather than somebody who was self-destructive and basically tragic. It was a profound problem for me because, as I told you, I did a lot of research about the character. And I felt, even though there were a lot of secrets and people might not have understood all the behavior, I did. So to be brought back 6 months later, I think it was. 6 months later, and told that you're going to totally change that character. It was very hard. And I think I fought against it for 3 weeks.
Oh, you did?
I remember we had meetings.
Oh, we did.
I remember.
No.
I was so mad.
But you were so...
This was a very big deal for an actress. An actress, prepares for a role. She reads a script. She understands what the character is. I guess feels a sense of ownership about the character. You guys test the movie, and the movie has a different ending. I watched Adrian Lyne's original ending, and I guess because I've seen because I know the movie so well, I found the original ending a little disappointing, frankly. It's supposedly Michael Douglas is supposed to get his comeuppance, where he's implicated in, she commits suicide, but he's implicated because his fingerprints are on the knife. But in the very end, Ann Archer listens to a tape which exculpates him, which basically says, it's a tape from Glenn Close's character that says that I'm going to kill myself. So you have an actor that basically says, I ain't going to do it. I ain't going to go shoot this other scene where Ann Archer's character, the sort of good witch, blows me away in the final season. How, as the producer, do you make this happen?
So, it was very hard for Adrian and myself as well, because the original ending, it didn't satisfy an audience, and the picture would have probably done, I don't know, $20 or $30 million, probably as a film noir, but it had its own reality and truth to it. So it was very hard on us too, and we kept talking about it, and Glenn, who is one of the greatest actresses ever and one of the most wonderful people to work with, fought it, but also kept trying to find a truth to it. And she talked to, psychologists. She'd have to tell you this, but I know she went and talked to people to find a truth, and she found this cutting thing that she did during the final scene. But the reason that we were able to do it is all due, and it's something that I used over and over again when I was the head of Paramount. Ned Tannen said to us, I know that you're having trouble with this, but shoot it. And if you don't like it, you don't have to use it. Now, that's incredible. He was giving us over $1 million, which is like $5 million today.
Yeah.
And he was saying to Glenn, if you don't like it, to Adrian, you don't have to use it. So when I was an executive, and often I was in a situation where the filmmaker didn't want to do what I, as a studio, thought was right, I would say, look, I'm going to give you the money to do it, and then we'll put it in front of an audience, and if you don't like it, you don't have to use it. And that's an irresistible offer. And so we really shot the hell out of it. Adrian did every possible thing. Glenn was, pushed in the water, pushed down from the water, pushed out. She was such a good sport. And then, of course, and I'll never forget this, I had seen every single take. I was there every single day, as was Stanley, every single daily, every single thing. And Adrian called me, and he had his own reluctance as well. And Adrian called me, and he said, come here, I want to show you something. And he ran the film, and he did what I call the wipe, where you wipe the mirror and you see Glenn Close behind you. And I jumped.
Right.
Now, I knew that was going to happen. And then I jumped again. And then I jumped again.
I jumped when you said it.
Yeah.
I didn't even have to see it.
I jumped again. And Adrian said, it works, doesn't it? And we both then went and saw 380 people jump in a theater. So
do you
it
have
was
to,
clear.
as a producer, though, you have to be an actor whisperer. I mean, is there something, what do actors want? What do they want to hear from you? And what do you have to tell them to get them to show up somewhere they don't want to go?
Well, in this case, I mean, everything is different, but mostly they want to know that you love the movie as much as they do, and that you do, and that you want to make it as good as possible, and that you believe in their talent, and you believe in their performance. And so they want to hear the truth, and that you're on their side and you're going to work through this.
Yeah. One of my favorite bosses in the world was the former editor of Elle magazine, Robbie Myers. I was just talking to her today about being a woman executive and the challenges of it. And I told her there was a period when I worked in the office for her, and she was such a nice person. But I fucked up on something, and she called me up and was very short. And because she was somebody who was usually very nice, for her to be very short with me, I knew immediately, if she was somebody who was bombastic and was yelling at me all the time, it's if everything's at 10, it means nothing. But if everything's always at 2 and you come at me with 10, I listen. And when I was reading the Galloway book, there were a few instances, because you seem like such a nice person and it seemed like very unruffleable, but there were a few instances where you had to deal with like Mike Myers, with Goldie Hawn. But I wondered if you can tell me personally what happened in those situations and what you actually said.
So I think for me, I didn't make the movies, the filmmakers make the movies, but to try to create a space where they could make the best movie possible. Yeah. And to always be on the side of the movie. That was the most important thing. So when Goldie Hawn, who I'm happy to say we're still friends, decides about a week before that she doesn't want to do the movie, that's an unacceptable thing, because a week before we're talking about
First Wives Club.
You're in for about, I don't know, tens of millions of dollars, and you can't replace her. I mean, first of all, I don't want to replace her, but you can't. So yeah, I remember when I said it, I tried to first talk to her. It was, I think, Christmas Eve. I tried first to talk to her, and this is an example of Scott saying, so he's not always the bully. Scott calling me and saying, Goldie doesn't want to do the movie. I think you should talk to her. I said, excuse me, you're the producer. He said, well, I tried, so he's not always a bully. So
Scott Rudin couldn't do that. Couldn't actually do
I
it
don't
himself.
know what
he
he
couldn't
did.
land. Okay, all right.
I think he did. I'll never know, but that's all I know is I got the call. So she said, I've read it. I can't do it. It doesn't work. I can't do it, blah, blah. And I tried very logically to talk her into it and to explain to her why she should do it. And then I guess 3 hours later, I remember I was in my closet. And I tell you, I was at home. And it's not that big a closet, but I had a phone there because you always have to be near a phone when you're running a studio because people are calling you it all the time. And she called and she said, I'm not doing it. And I said, I only have 2 words for you, Kim Basinger. And I hung up the phone. Now, Kim Basinger had walked out of a movie and they had sued her, I don't even know this woman, for everything that she had, and they won. And so the implication was if you
like
walk
$8 million. It was a judgment of $8 million.
Yeah.
It's boxing Helena, right? It basically changed her entire life.
And so I got a call back. You wouldn't do that to her. I said, no, I would do that to her. And my husband overheard it. And he said, what did you just say? I said, Billy, I'm not interested in this. I said, she walks away from the movie. I got no movie. I love this movie. She'll be fantastic in it. I don't know. Maybe she's just nervous, but I got to do what I got to do. That's my job. That is my job. It's not even a question.
Sherry, that is fucking gangster. Just let me tell you, picking up the phone in the closet and saying, I have 2 words for you, Kim Basinger, that is gangster. Click.
All right, so wait, what does gangster mean? What does that mean?
Well, I'm sorry. Well, gangster, it is very impressive in its power and its force.
Here's what happened.
Yeah.
So Monday she showed up, to do the movie a week later. And at 1:00, she calls me and she says, honey, what was I thinking? I'm having so much fun. This is so great. It could have ruined our friendship. I said, well, it didn't. And you're great. And she was spectacular in the movie.
Yeah.
They're all great, Goldie and Beth. That's your job. You don't have much of a choice.
Yeah.
And it's not being mean. You have to do it. That's your job.
And with Mike Myers, basically you were weeks away from production on Wayne's World 2. Unbeknownst to you, he had based the script on an existing property that you didn't own.
And we tried to get it. And we couldn't. They wouldn't sell the rights. And then I said to him, I know what I said to him. I have a team of lawyers outside my office.
No, you forgot the best part. How dare you put us in the position? We'll sue you. We'll take your fucking house. You won't even own a fucking home. That is beautiful.
I'm glad you think it's beautiful. I always thought that people would think I was terrible, but it's your job. And by the way, he wrote a good script. I remember saying to him, you go in that office, we'll put food under the door. I was like, but it was my job. And then Mike, it was okay. He understood what had happened, but we made the movie. It did very well. And Mike Myers is terrific. And he participates in Stand Up to Cancer all the time. So I adore him.
No, I just think it's, I have been, I've had certain moments where I've been difficult and it's certainly not, I can't compare it. But I mean, Mike Myers is like reputed to be like sort of very difficult. But I imagine that there are these moments in these people's lives and, there's an eccentricity in Hollywood with actors and writers that if they have this bracing moment where somebody actually says something like that it finally might pull them out of whatever kind of mind shit that they're... Was that your experience?
Well, I like Mike very much. And Mike, in his view, thought that they had the rights. I mean, he knew it was based on that. And so something got lost. And he knew we tried to get it. I think that... We were just trying to make the movie. I mean, we didn't have a choice. I mean, or you just cancel everything and eat the money and nothing good happens to anybody. Yeah.
Peter Bart never writes anything nice about anybody. He wrote that you wrote the playbook for how executives should leave Hollywood. They should say, I'm out. As you said in 2004, it was 2004, right? That you left Paramount and you said, I'm going to go do something else. And you've created this amazing philanthropic endeavor, the Sherry Lansing Foundation. And it doesn't seem like you particularly miss it, do you?
I don't miss one thing about it. It's got
to be one thing.
No, nothing. And I'll tell you why. I actually have more friends in the entertainment industry than I did when I was running a studio, because I would never want to be too close to talent, because then you have to say no to them. I love listening to the stories, and I get PTSD sometimes, but I have the same friends. I love seeing entertainment. I'm probably the biggest consumer. And I was done. I was involved in, I guess, over 200 movies at Paramount. I didn't feel the same as I did in the beginning. The highs weren't as high, the lows weren't as low. I always felt that if I was lucky enough to be successful, that I wanted to give back. And if I was financially secure, I wanted to set a foundation up. And I wanted to honor my mother, who died of cancer. And these last 18 years have been among the most joyful of my life. I'm, rewire, don't retire, which is an expression I read in a book once. And so I had to learn new things, flex new muscles. And I don't know, I feel younger than I felt.
It's interesting because when the LA Times, the news broke that you were leaving Paramount in the LA Times, and one of the things they said that there's speculation that she's going to go into politics, that you were, I think you may have gone to the John Kerry convention. And, reading your, getting to know your story, it seems like it would have been kind of perfect. Like you could have been the governor of California. I mean, was there ever a moment where...
I couldn't have run. I can't, I'm not good at asking people to give me attention. I'm good at asking people for
money. You've been asking
but for a cause. I never asked for money for myself. Was
there a moment? Was there ever a moment? Did anybody ever come to you and say,
yes, people have come to me, and there's never a moment that I ever thought about it seriously. No.
Yeah. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed spending time with you.
I had a great time talking to you too. It was wonderful.
Sherry, thank you. I've had so much fun.
I loved it.
That's our show. If you liked it, please subscribe, leave us a nice review and rating, and reconnect with the last 5 people you ghosted. Apologize to them, ask them not to kidnap your children, then quickly change the subject by suggesting they check out our podcast. The show is produced by myself, Andrew Goldman, as well as Rob Heath, whose Hollywood acting career ended as quickly as it began after he portrayed the Box in the 1993 flop Boxing Helena. Big thanks to Doug Collins at the Sherry Lansing Foundation, my friend and sounding board on issues that powerful women face, Robbie Myers. Thanks also to the whole team at Los Angeles Magazine, notably Silver Fox editor Mayor Rashan. The Originals is, as always, a highly replaceable production.